Hi guys. Tonight we are standing with you at the very edge of winter. The kind of winter that does not care about optimism or hard work. You can feel it already. The air sharp in your lungs, the ground stiff beneath your boots, the sky heavy with a pale promise of snow. This is not the cozy winter of blankets and warm drinks. This is the sort of cold that creeps into bones, freezes, crops solid, and quietly decides who makes it to spring and who does not. You are new here, a settler with big plans and thin walls, and you're about to learn something unsettling. You probably will not survive this winter if you stay above ground. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, tell me where you are listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights and let yourself step fully into this frozen moment. You're looking at the land around you, wide and open, beautiful, in a way that feels slightly hostile. Trees are scarce, timber expensive or non-existent, and the wind has nothing to slow it down. It rushes across the plains, howling like it's alive, stealing heat from your body with every second you stand still. Early settlers recorded winters so cold that ink froze in pens and breath turned to ice in beards. That is not poetry. That is a mainstream historical fact, pulled straight from letters and journals written by people who did not know if anyone would ever read their words. You try to imagine building a normal house here, wood walls, a peaked roof, maybe a fireplace if you're lucky, but the reality sets in quickly. Wood cracks in extreme cold, gaps form, wind finds every weakness, fires eat through precious fuel faster than you can replace it. Above ground, winter has too many ways in. Below ground, though, something changes. You kneel and press your hand to the soil. Even now, as the air bites at your fingers, the earth feels strangely neutral. Not warm exactly, but not cruel either. This is where the idea begins to form. The ground does not swing wildly between temperatures the way the air does. Soil insulates, it muffles sound, it slows heat loss. Settlers did not have modern thermometers, but they had bodies. And bodies noticed that cellars stayed cooler in summer and warmer in winter. That quiet observation would save lives. There is also fear pushing you downward. Winter storms here can last for days. Blizzards erase landmarks. People have walked a few steps from their homes and never made it back. Historians still debate whether the psychological terror of open winters was as dangerous as the physical cold itself. But you feel both pressing on you now. The sky feels too big. The land feels too empty. The ground at least offers enclosure. You're not the first human to think this way. That is the quirky detail that rarely gets mentioned. Long before these settlers arrived, people across the world lived partially or entirely underground. From ancient pit houses in what is now Ukraine to earth lodges used by indigenous groups in North America. Digging in was an old solution to an old problem. Many settlers did not like to admit they were copying techniques from cultures they considered inferior. Yet they did it anyway, quietly and pragmatically. As the temperature drops further, the decision stops being philosophical. It becomes urgent. You start digging. The sound of the shovel biting into frozen ground is dull and heavy. Each scoop smells faintly mineral damp alive. Your breath fogs. Your muscles ache. But with every foot you go down, the wind loses its voice. The silence below the surface is immediate and unsettling, like the world has been muted. You notice how your body reacts. Your shoulders relax just a little. Your fingers hurt less. This is not comfort, but it is relief. Underground, the temperature stays closer to the yearly average rather than the daily extremes. Modern science would later explain this clearly. But for now, all you know is that the cold does not claw at you quite so violently down here. There is a darker side to this choice, and you sense it even now. Light disappears quickly. The air feels heavier. Moisture clings to everything. Settlers wrote about the constant damp smell, the way clothes never fully dried, the way smoke from cooking fur S lingered too long. Some journals describe headaches and coughing fits, though historians still argue whether these were caused by smoke inhalation mold or unrelated illnesses that simply thrived in confined spaces. Still, the alternative is worse. Above ground, winter kills fast. Below ground, it kills slowly and sometimes not at all. That is the brutal calculation you're making, whether you admit it or not. As you dig deeper, you start to imagine the shape of your life here. A low ceiling that traps warmth, walls packed with sod, a narrow entrance you can block against storms. You are already thinking like someone who expects the earth to protect them. This shift in mindset is crucial. Settlers who survived their first winters often described a moment when they stopped fighting the land and started cooperating with it. There is also pride tangled up in this. Some neighbors will scoff. Living underground feels primitive, like admitting failure. Rumors spread about people becoming mole-like, half-feral, afraid of sunlight. Yet when the storms come, when roofs collapse under snow and chimneys snap in the wind, it is often the underground families who survive. You pause, leaning on your shovel, listening to the quiet. No wind, no endless horizon, just earth pressing in on all sides, steady and patient. It feels ancient, like something deep in your body recognizes this as safety. Anthropologists suggest humans may have an instinctive comfort with enclosed spaces because of our evolutionary past. Not everyone agrees, but standing here, you understand why the idea persists. The first snow will fall soon. You can smell it in the air, even from below ground, that clean metallic scent drifting down the entrance. You know now that winter is not something you endure passively. It is something you hide from. And so without ceremony, you keep digging, choosing the ground over the sky, choosing survival over pride, choosing darkness if it means warmth. The earth waits for you, silent and unjudging, as it has waited for countless winters before this one. You settle deeper into this new reality, and the truth becomes clearer with every breath you take. Winter's not just uncomfortable. It is the main antagonist of your story. Now, long before you worry about loneliness or conflict or even hunger, the cold makes its intentions known. It wants everything to stop moving. It wants silence. And if you misjudge it even slightly, it will take you without drama or noise. Above ground, the wind reduces its constant patrol. It scrapes across the land, slipping through seams in clothing, pressing against walls, rattling, anything not nailed down. Settlers wrote about hearing the wind at night like a living thing circling their homes, testing them. One widely accepted historical fact is that hypothermia was a leading cause of death in early frontier winters. Even among young and otherwise healthy adults, people simply froze sometimes within sight of shelter. You begin to understand why winter was feared more than raids or wild animals. Those dangers were visible. They arrived with warning. Cold, on the other hand, seeped in quietly. It stole dexterity from fingers. It slowed thinking. It turned small mistakes into fatal ones. Drop your gloves, miss a step, let a fire go out. That is all it takes. Underground, you feel temporarily spared. The earth absorbs the cold like a thick blanket, blunting its edge. When you light a small fire or even a single oil lamp, the warmth lingers instead of fleeing upward. This is why so many settlers made the same choice independently. They did not need to communicate or coordinate. The physics of survival guided them to the same conclusion. There is also the matter of fuel. Trees are precious here. Every log burned is a future day without heat. Above-ground homes hemorrhage warmth. Below-ground rooms conserve it. A quirky detail from settler accounts is how some families measured winter success not in comfort, but in how slowly their wood pile shrank. If the pile lasted until spring they had won, you start to realize that winter reshapes time itself. Days shorten, darkness stretches. Tusks that took minutes in summer now take hours. Snow must be cleared just to reach the entrance. Water freezes solid. Some settlers kept buckets of water inside their bedding at night so they would not turn to ice. It sounds absurd, but it was practical. Survival breeds strange routines. Historians still debate whether it was the sickle cold or the isolation of winter that caused more suffering. Many letters describe an oppressive stillness that settled in once the snow arrived. Travel stopped, news stopped, people disappeared into their homes sometimes for months. Underground living intensified this isolation. You're not just cut off from the world. You're wrapped in it. Your body adapts in small ways. You move less. You speak less. Every action is deliberate. Wasted motion means wasted heat. Even breathing feels different in the cold, slower and heavier. Underground, the air holds on to warmth, but it also holds on to smells and moisture. The scent of earth becomes constant. Damp wool, smoke, cooked grain. These odors soak into everything, including you. There is an emotional weight to winter that no amount of insulation fully blocks. You miss light. You miss space. Some settlers describe feeling as though the sky had been stolen from them. Yet when storms rage above, when you hear wind screaming over your buried roof, that loss feels acceptable. The earth presses close, reassuring in its own way. You think about those who refused to dig in. Pride kept them above ground. Others simply lacked the time or strength. Their stories often end abruptly in the records. A family gone, a homestead abandoned, a journal left half-finished. The cold did not need to explain itself. A fringe but fascinating idea suggests that underground living may have subtly altered social hierarchies during winter. In cramped spaces, cooperation mattered more than authority. Everyone shared the same air, the same darkness, the same risks. Some scholars argue this temporarily flattened social divisions, though evidence is fragmentary and debated. What is clear is that winter forced humility. It stripped away illusions of control. You could not conquer this land in January. You could only negotiate with it. Digging underground was not a triumph of engineering. It was an admission of vulnerability. As you lie back now, listening to the muffled world above you, feel that vulnerability soften into something like trust. The earth has done this before. It has sheltered countless winters, countless lives. You're just another warm presence it will briefly hold. Outside, snow piles higher. Inside, the temperature barely changes. That contrast becomes everything. Winter remains brutal, relentless, and unforgiving, but for the moment, it is held at bay by layers of soil and the quiet wisdom of going down instead of up. You wake before dawn, though dawn is now more of an idea than a visible event. Underground time feels softer, less exact. You judge morning by hunger, by the stiffness in your joints, by the way the cold nudges you awake rather than fully shaking you. Today is about preparation, not dreaming, not hoping, preparing before snowfall locks the land shut. Above-ground settlers who survived learned a hard lesson early. You do not dig once winter arrives. Frozen soil turns to stone, shovels bounce useless. Sly. Hands crack and bleed. That is why the smartest work happens now. While the ground still yields, while your breath does not yet sting with every inhale. This timing is one of those quiet historical facts that rarely makes it into textbooks, but shows up again and again in diaries and letters. Those who waited too long paid for it. You step outside briefly and the air greets you with sharp clarity. The sky is pale, stretched thin, and the wind carries a warning rather than a threat. Snow is coming. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. You can feel it in your teeth, in the way birds have gone silent, in the way the land itself seems to be holding still. Digging before snowfall becomes a kind of ritual, the rhythm of shovel into soil, the dull thud as earth piles. Beside the growing pit, your breath steady and visible. The smell of disturbed ground rises rich and damp, almost comforting. You're carving space, not just for shelter but for time. Time to think, time to survive. Early, settlers often dug into south-facing slopes when they could. This is a well-known historical practice. Sunlight warmed those slopes slightly more during the day, and snow tended to melt there first. It was a small advantage, but winter is won by small advantages stacked carefully together. Even underground people hunted for light. You're not alone in this effort. Neighbors dig too. Some work together, taking turns sharing tools. Others keep to themselves, driven by urgency or mistrust. There is an unspoken understanding that once snow falls, help becomes rare. Roads vanish, distances stretch, everyone must be ready. A quirky detail from this period is how often children were involved in digging. They carried soil-fetched, water-packed sod. Their small hands learned early what survival required. Some later remembered these days with strange fondness, associating the smell of earth with safety rather than fear. Memory does strange things when shaped by necessity. As the pit deepens, decisions multiply. How low is low enough? Too shallow and the cold still bites. Too deep and air becomes stale walls unstable. Historians still argue whether settlers intuitively understood optimal depth, or whether trial and error claimed many lives before rough standards emerged. Collapses did happen, so did suffocation. Knowledge came at a cost. You smooth the walls, pack them tight, line them with sod or timber if you have it. Every detail matters. Gaps mean drafts. Weak points mean danger. The ceiling will be low, uncomfortably so, by modern standards. You will stoop, you will bump your head, you will curse. Softly, but low ceilings trap heat, and heat is everything. You think ahead to the entrance. It cannot be wide. It must be easy to block. Some settlers built short, angled passages rather than direct openings, forcing cold air to sink before reaching the living space. This simple design trick made a measurable difference, though no one measured it at the time. They just felt it in what? RMR. Nights. Snow preparation extends beyond the structure itself. You stock food, root vegetables, dried meat, grain, anything that can survive months of cold and darkness. Underground storage becomes part of the home. The earth helps here too, keeping temperatures stable enough to prevent rot or freezing solid. It is one of the reasons cellars became universal wherever digging was possible. There is tension in this work. You know winter is coming. You feel it closing in. Every unfinished task carries weight. Some settlers described dreams filled with snow burying doorways, with fires going out with ceilings, collapsing under white pressure. Whether these were stress dreams or warnings from experiences open to interpretation, a fringe theory suggests that this intense seasonal preparation created a unique psychological state, a kind of winter mindset that sharpened focus and narrowed priorities. Survival psychology scholars point to these periods as examples of humans adapting mentally as much as physically. Others argue this romanticizes hardship. The debate remains unresolved. As daylight fades, you climb out of the pit and look back at your work. It does not look like much. A hole in the ground, rough edges, piles of soil waiting to be shaped into walls or roofs. But you feel a quiet satisfaction. This is progress measured not in beauty, but in resilience. The first snowflake lands on your sleeve as you turn away. It melts instantly, leaving a dark spot, a warning shot. You quicken your pace, knowing that soon, very soon, this entrance will be your boundary between life and the frozen world above. When you finally retreat underground for the night, the space feels different, more intentional, less temporary. You lie there listening to the faint sounds of preparation above ground shovels, scraping voices calling out the last movements of a world about to fall silent. Soon snow will smooth everything, flat, but beneath it you will be ready, waiting in the earth you shaped before. Winter sealed it shut. You begin to notice something subtle but powerful as winter settles in. The cold outside grow, sharper by the day, yet inside your earthbound shelter, the change is almost polite. Nights cool slightly, days warm slightly. The wild swings that punish the surface world simply do not reach you in the same way. This quiet stability becomes your greatest ally. The soil around you acts like a slow-breathing wall. It absorbs heat when you generate it and releases it gradually instead of letting it vanish into the air. People living through these winters may not have understood thermal mass in scientific terms, but their bodies understood the effect immediately. Diaries from the 19th century describe underground rooms staying bearable, even when outdoor temperatures plunged far below freezing for weeks at a time. That lived experience, repeated across regions, is one of the clearest reasons underground shelters spread so quickly. You run your hand along the packed earth wall. It feels cool, slightly damp, but not icy. This matters more than comfort. Wood exposed to extreme cold becomes brittle. Nails loosen, gaps open. Earth does not behave that way. It shifts slowly, grudgingly. It protects by refusing to change too quickly. There is also silence here. Snow above acts like another layer of insulation, muffling sound until the world feels padded. Wind still rages, but you hear it as a distant sigh rather than a scream. Many settlers wrote about sleeping better underground, not because life was easier, but because the noise of winter could no longer keep them half awake with fear. An overlooked detail from these accounts is how often people underestimated just how effective this insulation was. Some worried about freezing overnight and woke to find frost barely formed inside, even with minimal heat. Others were surprised to discover that once warmed, the space stayed warm longer than expected. These small revelations reinforced trust in the ground lesson by lesson. Not everyone agreed on how effective earth insulation truly was. Some modern researchers suggest that moisture in the soil could offset heat retention, especially in poorly drained areas. Others counter that careful site selection made all the difference. The disagreement has never fully settled, largely because conditions varied so widely. What worked beautifully in one region failed miserably in another. You adapt your routines around this steadiness. Fires burn lower and longer. Meals cook slowly. You stop rushing. Above ground, everything feels urgent in winter. Below ground, urgency softens. Time stretches. This shift is not just physical, but psychological. A steady environment calms the nervous system, something settlers may not have named but certainly felt. There are trade-offs. Dampness creeps in. Condensation forms where warm breath meets cool walls. Clothes stay heavy with moisture. Some families fought this by lining walls with straw or animal hides, creating a buffer that wicked moisture away. Others simply accepted it, trading dryness for warmth. You think about children again. They crawl and play on packed earth floors, learning early that this is home. For them, the underground space does not feel like a compromise. It feels normal. Some adults later reflected that children adapted more easily than grown-ups, perhaps because they had fewer expectations to mourn. Outside, the ground freezes solid, locking in everything above it. Inside, the earth remains workable, pliable, alive in a muted way. This difference has practical benefits. Repairs are possible. Adjustments can be made, even small. Expansions happen midwinter if absolutely necessary. Above ground, construction stops entirely. There is not intimacy to living wrapped in soil. You become aware of tiny shifts, a drip during a thaw, a faint crack as frozen layers expand. The earth speaks quietly and you learn to listen. Those who ignored the signs sometimes paid for it when sea pilings sagged or water seeped in unexpectedly. Some writers of the time compared underground living to being held, even cradled. Others found the sensation oppressive. The truth likely depended on temperament as much as circumstance. What cannot be denied is that earth insulation made survival possible in places where surface living simply failed. You lie back now, fire glowing, softly, heat lingering instead of fleeing upward. Above you, layers of soil, snow, and sky stack patiently. Each one dulls the cold a little more. The earth does not fight winter, it absorbs it, and by placing yourself inside it, you borrow that same quiet strength, letting the season pass over you rather than through you. You start to realize that what feels like a desperate adaptation is actually something much older than this settlement, older even than the names people give to this land. The idea of living partly underground does not originate here. It drifts in quietly from deep time, carried by memory, imitation, and survival instinct. As you sit in the low light, you picture other people centuries earlier making the same choice for the same reasons. Archaeological evidence shows that pit dwellings appeared independently in many parts of the world. From the cold steppes of Central Asia to the high plains of North America, humans learned that going down into the earth softened the harshest climates. This shared solution emerged long before written records, which tells you something important. It worked. Settlers rarely admitted this lineage outright. Many arrived believing themselves to be innovators carving civilization out of wilderness. Yet their underground homes often mirrored structures used by indigenous communities nearby. Earth lodges, semi-obturated winter houses, and dugouts had been refined over generations. Settlers borrowed these ideas, selectively, sometimes unknowingly, sometimes while refusing to acknowledge the source. You can feel that borrowed wisdom in the layout of your shelter, the low entrance, the packed earth, walls, the way heat pools near the sleeping area. These are not random choices. They're inherited solutions, even if the inheritance was never formally passed down. There is tension in this exchange of knowledge. Some settlers dismissed indigenous housing as primitive while quietly copying its most effective features. Others openly admired the designs and sought advice. Personal accounts vary widely, which makes this an area of ongoing interpretation. Some historians suggest necessity softened prejudice during winter, while others argue that borrowing remained largely unspoken and uncredited. Small details reveal this blending of traditions. Smoke holes positioned to manage airflow, floors slightly lower than the surrounding ground trap warmth. Sleeping platforms raised just enough to avoid dampness. These choices appear again and again across cultures separated by oceans and centuries. Convergence like this rarely happens by accident. Ice. How the earth smells different when shaped by hands rather than left wild. There is warmth in it now, familiarity. This is something ancient communities understood deeply. They treated the ground not as an enemy to conquer, but as a partner. Settlers often arrived with a different mindset, but winter had a way of correcting it. One curious observation from early accounts is how quickly people stopped seeing underground living as temporary. What began as a winter measure sometimes extended into years. Children grew up, knowing no other home. Seasonal shelters became permanent. This transition surprised many who had planned to build wooden houses later. Life underground simply worked. There is disagreement among researchers about how much of this continuity was intentional. Some argue settlers consciously adopted proven designs. Others believe similar environments naturally produced similar solutions regardless of cultural exchange. The evidence supports elements of both views, leaving the full picture open to interpretation. As you adjust your living space, adding small comforts, you feel connected to those earlier builders. You're repeating motions learned by hands long gone, packing earth, shaping walls, adjusting airflow. These acts carry memory even when names are forgotten. The ground above you holds more than soil and snow. It holds layers of human experience. Each generation adds its weight, its heat, its stories. By choosing to live underground, you step into that low-ng continuity, whether you realize it or not. Outside, winter deepens. Inside, your shelter feels increasingly settled. Not finished, perhaps never finished, but lived in. The earth accepts you without comment, just as it accepted those before you. And in that quiet acceptance, you find not just survival, but a sense of belonging that stretches far beyond this single winter night. You lower yourself into the finished space and finally understand what a sod house truly is. From the outside, it looks like a wound. In the prairie, a low rise of earth barely interrupting the flat horizon. From the inside, it feels like a pocket carved out of the world, small, dim, and surprisingly protective. This is not a cave in the romantic sense. It is practical, heavy, and close. Sod houses spread rapidly across treeless regions, especially in the Great Plains. This is well documented in homestead records and land surveys. With little timber available, settlers turned to the thick grass roots beneath their feet. Prairie sod cut into dense bricks was stacked into walls and roofs that resisted wind and cold far better than expected. These homes were sometimes called dugouts when set into hillsides, blurring the line between building and burrow. You brush your fingers against the wall. Grass roots protrude slightly pale and fibrous. In spring, some even sprout, turning ceilings faintly green. People joked about trimming their roofs with scissors. It sounds humorous, but it reveals something real. Heisei homes were alive in a way wooden houses were not. They grew shifted and responded to seasons. Life inside is low and narrow, ceilings pressed down. Light comes through a single small window or door, often covered with oiled cloth rather than glass. When snow piles up outside, that light dims further until day and night blur together. Settlers often oriented their daily routines around the fire instead of the sun. Despite appearances, sod houses perform remarkably well in winter. Accounts describe indoor temperatures staying far above freezing even during extended cold spells. Families slept without coats, sometimes without blankets near the fire. This was not luxury, but it was survivable, which mattered far more. Not everyone agreed on their merits. Some observers described sod houses as damp, dark, and unhealthy. Others praised their durability and warmth. Modern assessments reflect this split. Conditions varied dramatically depending on drainage, construction quality, and maintenance. There was no universal experience, only personal ones. You notice the floor beneath you is hard packed earth. Rugs or hides soften it slightly. Dust rises with movement. Everything smells faintly of soil. For some, this smell became comforting. For others, it never did. Settlers carried these sensory memories for life, sometimes recalling them decades later with surprising clarity. There is a small fire burning now. Smoke curls upward, finding its way out through a narrow vent. Managing this, flow becomes a daily skill. Too much fire and the air thickens. Too little, and the cold creeps back. Children learned early how to adjust dampers and feed fuel carefully. It was a household. Knowledge passed through practice, not instruction manuals. One little-known detail is how sodas muffled sound from the outside world. Thunderstorms, wind, even nearby movement became distant and dull. This isolation could feel peaceful or unsettling depending on the moment. Some settlers spoke of feeling cut off from danger. Others felt buried. Questions remain about the long-term health effects of living in sod houses. Some medical historians suggest respiratory issues may have been more common due to smoke and mold. Others argue that fresh air vents and constant low heat mitigated many risks. The limited data leaves room for interpretation. As winter deepens, you find your body adapting to this space. You move carefully. You duck without thinking. You listen differently. Above ground, you watch the horizon. Here you watch the fire, the walls, the ceiling. Your awareness turns inward, focused on the small details that keep you warm. Outside, snow smooths the prairie into a white plain. Inside, your sod house holds firm. It is not beautiful by conventional standards. It is not meant to impress. It exists for one reason only, to keep you alive when the land offers no mercy. And in doing that job quietly and stubbornly, it becomes something like home. You become aware of the quiet first. Not silence exactly, but a thick softness where sound seems to give up halfway to your ears. Snow has finished falling above you, and with it comes that strange winter hush, as if the land itself has decided to speak in whispers. Underground, this quiet deepens. It wraps around you heavy and constant. The air carries layers of scent, damp earth, smoke that never quite leaves, wool warmed by bodies. When you breathe, you feel the air linger slower to move than it ever was outside. Settlers often describe this sensation as breathing inside the land rather than on it. That phrasing appears again and again in personal letters, hinting at how intimate this environment felt. Daily life settles into a careful rhythm. Fires are kept small but steady. Cooking happens close to the heat source, often in iron pots that absorb warmth and release it slowly. This method conserved fuel and reduced smoke bursts, a technique passed between families through observation rather than instruction. You learn quickly because mistakes are uncomfortable at best and dangerous at worst. There is not stillness to movement here. Footsteps make dull thuds instead of sharp sounds. Voices soften naturally. Even laughter feels muted. Children adapt first, lowering their voices without being told. Adults follow, guided by instinct. The space demands it. At night the sounds change. The fire settles. Ice cracks somewhere, above a deep distant noise like wood splitting. Sometimes snow slides off the roof with a heave. Why sigh? These noises are startling at first. Later they become reassurance. The structure is holding. The world above is still there. Light behaves differently underground. A single flame feels powerful, casting long shadows that stretch and shrink with every movement. Settlers often used reflective surfaces like polished metal or pale fabric to spread light more efficiently. This small adjustment made evenings feel longer and less oppressive, a subtle but meaningful comfort. Not everyone experienced this environment the same way. Some found the closeness calming. Others felt their thoughts turn inward too sharply. Records describe moments of sudden panic, a need to step outside, even in bitter cold, just to see the sky. How common this was remains unclear. Personal temperament likely played a large role. You become aware of your own body in new ways, the warmth of others nearby, the sound of breathing in the dark, the way your heart rate slows as the hours stretch. Underground living encourages stillness. Stillness conserves heat. Over time, stillness becomes habit. There are small rituals that form naturally. Boots are always placed in the same spot to dry. Tools hang within arm's reach. Water is kept close to the fire, but not too close. These patterns reduce movement and prevent accidents. They also create a sense of order in a world that feels otherwise unpredictable. An unexpected detail appears in winter accounts. People often slept better underground, despite the harsh IPs. With wind muffled and temperatures stable, sleep came more easily. Dreams, however, were vivid. Some settlers wrote about dreaming of open skies and endless light. Others dreamed of Earth closing in. The meaning of these dreams was rarely discussed, perhaps because there was no time for introspection when survival demanded focus. Outside storms may rage without your full awareness. Inside you learn to listen for subtle cues, a change in air pressure, a faint drip signaling melt, a draft that should not be there. The earth teaches attentiveness. As you lie back, now wrapped in layers, fire glowing softly, the underground world feels complete in its own strange way. Not comfortable, not easy, but contained. The smells, the quiet, the closeness all blend into a single sensation. You are held in place, protected from the worst of winter by soil and habit and patience. And for tonight, that is enough. You begin to notice how winter reshapes roles, as much as it reshapes landscapes. Underground, the boundaries between public and private life blur. There is no spare room to retreat into, no distance to cool emotions. Every movement is shared. Every sound is heard. Survival becomes a collective effort, and nowhere is this more visible than in the daily work carried out by women and children. Domestic routines change dramatically once life moves below the surface. Cooking, cleaning, sewing, teaching, and nursing all happen in the same compressed space. The fire becomes the center of everything. Meals are planned not just around nutrition, but around fuel use and heat retention. Long simmering stews replace quick frying. Bread bakes slowly in covered, pots buried near embers. These methods appear again and again in household notes and oral histories from cold regions. Children grow up fast in this environment. They learn early how to move quietly, how to tend fire without flaring it, how to recognize the signs of bad air. Many could tell by smell alone when a vent needed opening. This kind of sensory knowledge rarely appears in official records, but it surfaces in later recollections, spoken with a mix of pride and disbelief. You watch how light is rationed. Candles are precious, lamps are trimmed carefully. Shadows become familiar companions. Women often worked by feel as much as sight fingers, memorizing stitches, knots, and seams. This skill was not romantic. It was necessary. Poor light saved fuel and reduced fire risk, but it demanded patience and precision. The underground space also alters social expectations. Privacy all but disappears. Childbirth happens close to everyone. Illness is shared. Grief echoes. Yet this closeness can foster resilience. Many families reported stronger bonds formed during these winters, forged by necessity rather than choice. Not all accounts are warm. Some described tension simmering in confined quarters. Arguments had nowhere to go. Silence could become heavy. How widespread this strain was remains uncertain, as people were far more likely to record practical details than emotional ones. Absence in the record does not equal absence in experience. There are small comforts woven into daily life: a favorite cup, a worn blanket, a lullaby sung softly so sound does not bounce off low walls. Mothers and older siblings often became storytellers, filling long evenings with tales that stretched beyond the earth's ceiling. These stories connected children to a wider world they could not see for months at a time. A detail that surprises modern readers is how much education continued underground. Reading lessons happened by firelight. Arithmetic was scratched into dirt, floors. Knowledge was treated as another tool for survival, something to be carried forward, no matter how harsh conditions became. Clothing maintenance was constant. Dampness worked its way into everything. Socks and mittens were dried and re-dried. Women developed careful systems for rotating garments, so something was always wearable. Some accounts mention heated stones wrapped in cloth and tucked into bedding and improvised warmth that doubled as a drying aid. There is debate among social historians about whether underground living reinforced traditional gender roles or temporarily flattened them. Evidence points in both directions. While women carried enormous domestic burdens, men often took on tasks usually considered indoor work simply because space and necessity demanded flexibility. Winter did not care about custom. Children absorbed these dynamics without comment. For them, this was normal. The underground space was not a hardship to remember, but a baseline to grow from. Many later recalled missing the closeness once families moved above ground again. As night deepens, you sense the household settling. Breathing sinks, movement slow, the fire hums softly. Outside, winter continues its work, indifferent and vast. Inside, life persists in careful patterns shaped by necessity, patience, and quiet cooperation. You lie there listening, aware that survival here is not heroic or dramatic. It is made of small hands, repeated motions, and shared warmth. The underground shelter holds not just bodies, but relationships, teaching them how to endure together when the world above offers no room for error. You begin to understand that survival underground is not only about warmth and shelter. It is also about food quietly waiting beneath your feet while the world above freezes solid. Winter is long here, too long to rely on fresh hunting or foraging. What you stored before the snow fell will decide how the season ends. You crouch near a shallow pit dug into the floor or just beyond the living space. This is where roots rest in the dark. Potatoes, turnips, carrots wrapped in straw or packed in sand. They sit in cool, steady temperatures that slow decay without turning them to ice. This practice shows up repeatedly in settlement records and agricultural manuals of the time. Underground storage was not optional. It was essential. The earth acts like a patient guardian. It keeps food cold but not frozen, dry but not brittle. Above ground, winter destroys. Below ground, it preserves. You notice how little changes week to week. The air smells faintly sweet and earthy. Nothing sharp, nothing spoiled. That constancy brings comfort. Meat is stored here too. Salted pork, dried venison, sometimes fresh meat frozen intentionally near entrances where cold air lingers. Families learn to place foods carefully using subtle temperature differences within the shelter. Warmth near the fire, cold near the door, neutral zones in between. This spatial awareness becomes second nature. An interesting detail emerges in old letters. Some settlers spoke of checking stored food daily, not out of fear, but out of reassurance. Touching a sack of grain or a basket of roots became a ritual, proof that sustenance still existed. In winter, certainty matters. You learn that rodents are a constant concern. Underground living attracts them. Mice find warmth irresistible. People devised clever solutions. Elevated shelves, stone barriers, traps, set with precision. Cats became invaluable. Their presence offered more than pest control. They were companions in a season that stripped life down to essentials. Food preparation changes too. Meals stretch ingredients carefully. Broths are reused. Bones simmer until they give up every bit of flavor. Waste feels dangerous. Nothing edible is discarded lightly. This mindset appears clear. Lie in winter journals where recipes blur into survival strategies rather than culinary expression. Some accounts describe surprising variety despite scarcity. Dried berries added to stews, fermented vegetables offering sharpness against endless blandness. These small flavors mattered more than nutrition alone. They reminded people of seasons beyond winter. There is some uncertainty about how effective underground storage was in preventing illness. Spoilage still occurred. Mold still appeared. Some researchers suggest that foodborne sickness may have been underreported or misattributed to other causes. Others argue that careful storage techniques reduced risk significantly. The truth likely varied household by household. You notice how food storage shapes daily movement. People tread carefully near these areas. No sudden steps, no careless spills. The floor is not just a floor, it is a pantry ceiling. Every action carries awareness. Children are taught early what can and cannot be touched. Boundaries are clear. Hunger teaches respect quickly. Some later recalled sneaking bites of stored food and the severe scolding that followed. Not cruelty, fear. A missing carrot in January could mean something very different in March. There is also a communal aspect. Neighbors sometimes pulled storage, especially after illness or accident. Sharing food underground meant sharing risk, but it also meant sharing survival. These informal networks rarely appear in official documents, yet traces of them surface in personal correspondence and oral tradition. As winter drags on, you mark time by what is eaten. Fresh bread becomes rare. Root vegetables dominate. Meat portions shrink. Each meal carries information. How much remains? How careful you must be. Underground storage turns eating into quiet accounting. You sit now with a simple bowl, steam rising slowly. The scent rich despite humble ingredients. The warmth lingers in the air rather than escaping. Beneath you, more food waits. Not abundant, but enough if managed wisely. Outside, snow covers fields that once fed you. Inside, the earth holds what you planned for months ago. This delayed reward feels profound. You're living on past effort, past foresight. Underground storage collapses. Time, bringing autumn into winter one meal at a time. As you finish eating, you replace lid-smooth disturbed soil, restore order. These small acts feel ceremonial. Respect for what remains. Respect for the ground that guards it. You settle back, stomach warm, aware that survival here depends on patience as much as preparation. The earth does not rush, neither can you. And so winter continues, measured not in days, but in meals quietly preserved beneath your feet. You start to notice the warmth of the animals before you see them. A steady living heat that settles into the underground space and changes its rhythm. Survival here does not leave room for modern ideas of separation. When winter tightens its grip, bodies cluster, and the line between human and livestock fades into practicality. In many settlements, animals were brought as close as possible during the coldest months. Sometimes they were housed in adjoining dugouts. Sometimes they shared the same structure, separated by little more than a low wall or packed earth barrier. This arrangement shows up repeatedly in winter accounts from frontier regions where barns were impossible to heat and exposure meant death. You hear the soft shift of weight, the slow breathing, the occasional snort or shuffle. Livestock generate warmth simply by being alive. That warmth drifts upward, pooling in living spaces. The air changes too, heavier, richer, not pleasant by modern standards, but unmistakably alive. For many families, this shared heat made the difference between enduring winter and succumbing to it. Children often slept closest to these animal areas. The logic was simple. Smaller bodies lost heat faster. Parents arranged sleeping spaces based on warmth gradients rather than comfort. This choice appears in family recollections, later told with a mix of humor and gratitude. At the time, it was not sentimental, it was survival math. There are practical benefits beyond warmth. Animals stay healthier when protected from wind and snow. Milk production drops less sharply. Chickens lay more consistently when shielded from extreme cold. These small advantages ripple outward, stabilizing food supplies when everything else feels uncertain. Of course, this closeness, ohms with cost. The smell intensifies. Moisture rises, disease risk increases. Some families rotated animals in and out to manage air quality. Others relied on vents and frequent cleaning. The effectiveness of these strategies varied widely. What worked for one household failed for another, leaving modern readers with a patchwork of outcomes rather than clear conclusions. You learn quickly how to move around animals in confined spaces. Slow, predictable. Startling a cow or goat underground is dangerous. Settlers developed quiet signals, soft clicks and murmurs to guide movement without panic. This kind of communication rarely appears in official records, but it surfaces in personal memories passed down as family lore. There is something grounding about this shared space. Animals do not worry about winter in abstract terms. They respond to warmth, food, and shelter. Their steady presence anchors the household in the physical moment. You find yourself timing your own routines to theirs. Feeding, resting, sleeping. Life narrows into simple cycles. Some observers at the time criticized this practice as unsanitary or backward. Others defended it fiercely. Later evaluations remain mixed, shaped by changing standards of hygiene and animal care. What cannot be denied is that in extreme conditions, separation was a luxury many could not afford. You feel the vibration of hooves through the packed earth floor, a reminder that survival here is communal across species. Everyone contribute. Ease, heat. Everyone shares risk. The underground shelter becomes a living system rather than a collection of individuals. As night deepens, the combined warmth settles into the space, thick and steady. The fire burns lower, breath slows. Outside, the cold presses down harder, but it meets resistance from a cluster of bodies refusing to give up their heat. You lie there, listening to the rhythm of life around you. Human breathing, animal breathing, the faint crackle of embers. This closeness would be unthinkable in another season. In winter, it feels inevitable. The earth above holds it all together. Soil, snow, roof. The shelter hums with shared warmth, a quiet agreement between humans and animals to endure together. And in that agreement, you find not comfort exactly, but a deep, steady resilience that carries you through the darkest stretch of winter nights. You wake to a stillness so complete it feels unreal. Above you, the landscape has vanished under layers of snow, but you do not need to see it to know. The cold has settled into a deep, sustained hold. the kind that lasts weeks rather than days. Up there, fences disappear, paths vanish, even familiar hills blur into nothing. Down here, life continues in a narrow band of steadiness. Underground, the temperature barely wavers. Nights cool slightly, days warm slightly. The difference is subtle enough that you stop thinking in terms of morning and evening. Time reorganizes itself around tasks instead. Feed the animals, stir the pot. Check. The vents, add fuel, rest, repeat. This rhythm replaces the sun. Settlers often describe this contrast with quiet amazement. Outside temperatures could plunge to levels that shattered trees and froze rivers solid. Inside, water remained liquid. Hands stayed functional. Breathing stayed calm. This stability was not comfort in the modern sense, but it was a shield against extremes that killed quickly and without warning. You imagine the world above you now, snow drifting against the buried entrance, wind smoothing the surface until nothing hints at life below. From a distance, the land looks empty, abandoned. Travelers have passed within yards of underground homes without realizing anyone was there. This invisibility was accidental, but it offered protection of its own. Sound travels strangely through snow and soil. Explosions of wind become murmurs. Footsteps vanish. Even storms feel distant, like weather happening in another place entirely. Many settlers wrote that they learned about blizzards only after emerging days later to a transformed world. Inside, your senses recalibrate. You hear smaller things, the creak of packed earth shifting, the faint drip of meltwater during brief thaws, the change in airflow when snow seals vents too tightly. These signals matter. Miss them and the shelter can become dangerous. There is an uneasy beauty to this buried life. While the surface world freezes into immobility, underground spaces remain gently alive. Fires glow. Breath fogs lightly and fades. Warmth pools near the ceiling. The earth absorbs sound and motion, creating a sense of separation that feels almost peaceful. Some people found this separation deeply unsettling. Accounts describe moments of disorientation when emerging briefly and feeling overwhelmed by light and space. Others spoke of reluctance to leave the shelter even when weather improved. The underground world had become familiar, predictable, safe. Interpretations differ on whether this withdrawal was purely practical or partly psychological. Extended confinement changes perception. The boundary between shelter and self can blur. For some, this closeness to the earth fostered calm. For others, it fed anxiety. The experiences resist easy generalization. You sit quietly now, listening to the muted world. The fire crackles softly. Animals shift in their sleep. Someone turns over nearby. Above you, snow piles higher, but you feel none of its weight. The soil spreads pressure evenly, turning danger into stillness. When you eventually climb outside after a long stretch below, the shock is always the same. Light feels too bright, cold feels too sharp, space feels enormous. Yet you also feel gratitude. You are not erased by winter. You pass through it unseen. For now, though you remain below, the underground space holds steady, unchanged by the chaos above. The frozen world can rage as much as it wants. Down here, life continues at its own quiet pace, sheltered beneath snow that hides you completely from winter's worst intentions. You begin to notice changes that have nothing to do with temperature or food. They happen quietly inside your thoughts, in the way silence stretches and darkness settles in. Living underground does not just protect the body, it reshapes the mind. Without regular daylight, your sense of time loosens. Days blur together, weeks pass, without clear markers. You stop counting in numbers and start counting in habits. How often the stew pot is refilled, how many times the fire needs tending, how long it has been since anyone stepped outside. This way of measuring time appears repeatedly in winter journals where dates fade and routines take their place. The darkness presses gently but persistently. Lamps and fires push it back only so far. Shadows cling to corners. Faces look different by flickering light, softer, sometimes unfamiliar. Children occasionally ask what color the sky is today. Adults answer carefully, aware of how easily longing can take root. Some settlers described an unexpected calm settling over them after the first weeks below ground. Thoughts slowed, worries narrowed. The world shrank to manageable size. Others reported the opposite: restlessness, irritability, sudden bursts of fear without clear cause. The same environment produces very different inner landscapes. You find yourself listening more to your own breathing, your own heartbeat. In the quiet, these sounds feel louder, more present. Sleep comes easily some night. And refuses to arrive on others. Dreams grow vivid. Many people later recalled dreaming of open fields of standing, upright, without ducking of light pouring in from impossible windows. There is disagreement among psychologists studying historical confinement about whether these reactions reflect stress adaptation or both at once. The evidence comes mostly from personal writings rather than controlled observation, leaving interpretation open. What is clear is that underground living demanded mental flexibility as much as physical endurance. Conversation takes on new importance. Words become entertainment, reassurance, and release. Stories are repeated and reshaped. Jokes stretch thin but are still told. Silence, once feared, becomes familiar. You learn when to speak and when to let quiet do its work. Children respond differently. Many seem less troubled by the darkness. They play in small spaces. They invent games with shadows and firelight. Adults often worried about the long-term effects on young minds. But later reflection suggests children adapted, quickly, carrying fewer expectations of what winter should feel like. You notice how emotions echo in close quarters. One person's anxiety spreads easily, so does calm. Families develop unspoken systems to manage this, a song at the right moment, a task offered without comment, a shared meal when tension rises. These small interventions matter. There are moments when the walls feel too close, when you crave space with an intensity tea. Hat surprises you. Some settlers stepped outside briefly, even in extreme cold, just to stand upright and see the horizon. These excursions were risky but deeply relieving. They remind you that the world still exists beyond soil and snow. At the same time, the underground shelter becomes a mental refuge. When storms rage, you feel insulated, not just physically, but emotionally. The chaos above feels distant, abstract. You are removed from it in a way that brings relief. As winter grinds on, your mind settles into this contained world. You stop fighting it. You stop waiting for it to end every moment. Acceptance arrives quietly. Not joy, not despair, but a steady patience that carries you through long, dark stretches. You lie back now, listening to the soft sounds of life around you. The earth holds, steady, your thoughts slow. The underground space, once strange and confining, now feels familiar, protective. For tonight, your mind rests where your body has learned to rest. Beneath the surface, away from the frozen vastness above, you begin to notice how much of what keeps you alive this winter did not come from your own planning. It came from watching, copying, and quietly absorbing methods that existed long before you arrived. Some of them were offered openly. Others were taken without acknowledgement. All of them worked. Before winter sealed the land, you had seen different kinds of shelters nearby. Rounded earth lodges, half sunk into the ground, entrances turned away from prevailing winds, roofs thick with soil and grass. At the time they may have looked unfamiliar or even crude to you. Now living inside your own underground space, the logic feels obvious. These structures were shaped by generations of trial refined through winters far harsher than the one you're facing now. You remember how heat behaves in your shelter, how it lingers near the ceiling, how the entrance traps cold air below before it reaches the living space. These are not coincidences. They mirror designs used by indigenous communities who understood this land intimately. Their winter homes were not improvised. They were carefully tuned to climate materials and seasonal movement. Some settlers sought guidance directly, others observed from a distance, adjusting their own shelters without ever naming the source. Personal journals hint at both approaches. One person writes about being shown how to angle an entrance tunnel. Another describes noticing how smoke escaped from a nearby lodge without choking those inside. The tone varies from gratitude to quiet appropriation. You feel the weight of this exchange now sitting in warmth made possible by knowledge that crossed cultural lines under pressure. Winter had a way of stripping away illusion. When survival was at stake, practical solutions mattered more than pride. There were moments of tension, too. Misunderstandings, dismissals, advice ignored until conditions grew desperate. Some techniques were adopted only after failure made alternatives impossible. By then the cost had already been paid. You had just a vent slightly recalling how someone once explained the importance of airflow with simple gestures rather than words. At the time you did not fully understand. Now you do. The air clears, the fire steadies, the lesson settles into your hands, rather than your head. Not every borrowed method translated perfectly. Materials differed, soil behaved differently. What worked well in one region failed elsewhere. This led to adaptation rather than imitation. Settlers blended ideas, reshaping them to fit their own circumstances. The result was neither entirely traditional nor entirely new. There is discomfort in recognizing how much depended on this borrowed wisdom. It complicates simple narratives of self-reliance. Yet, winter does not reward simple stories. It rewards effectiveness. Children absorb these blended practices without context. For them, the method matters more than its origin. They grow up packing earth, tending fires, managing airflow as if it were instinct. Later, they may never realize where these habits began. As you sit quietly listening to the fire breathe, you understand something essential. Knowledge travels in subtle ways. It moves through observation, necessity, and shared space. It survives even when names are lost or erased. Outside, the land remains indifferent. Inside, warmth persists because someone long ago learned how to live with this place rather than against it. You are part of that long chain now, whether you acknowledge it or not. The underground shelter feels steady around you, shaped by many hands across time. The earth does not care where ideas come from. It responds only to what works. And tonight, what works is holding you safely beneath the frozen world above. Fire becomes your most careful companion now. Not dramatic, not roaring, but steady and restrained like a creature that must be fed just enough to stay calm. Underground fire is never casual. Every flame is watched. Every spark matters. You crouch close to the hearth, feeling the warmth settle into your knees and palms. The heat spreads outward, slowly soaking into earth walls that give nothing back all at once. This slow exchange is what keeps the space livable. Too much fire, and the air thickens. Too little, and the cold presses in from every surface. Settlers learn this balance through experience rather than instruction. Letters mentioned smoky nights, stinging eyes, headaches that lifted only after vents were widened or fires reduced. These were lessons learned in real time, often at personal cost. Fire underground could heal or harm with equal ease. The design of the hearth is simple but intentional. Stones arranged to hold heat. Ash kept nearby to smother sudden flare-ups. Fuel added in small increments. Wood burns differently here. It lasts longer, but smoke lingers. Dried animal dung is sometimes used instead, producing steady heat with less flame, though the smell takes getting used to. You notice how carefully the fire is timed. Cooking happens when air movement is best. Sleeping waits until smoke clears. Someone always checks the vent before resting. These habits become automatic, passed silently between hands and glances. There are moments when the fire feels dangerous. A sudden downdraft, a blocked outlet after heavy snowfall. In those moments, tension rises quickly. Children are moved closer to fresh air. Flames are damped. Silence sharpens. Everyone listens. Some families cut extra vents or temporary openings during storms, trading heat for safety. Others relied on portable braziers that could be extinguished quickly. The success of these strategies varied. What worked in one shelter failed in another depending on layout, weather, and materials. Fire also becomes a source of light and focus. Evenings gather around it. Faces glow amber. Shadows stretch and retreat. Stories emerge naturally in this circle, not planned entertainment, but something to anchor attention and ease the mind. You learn the sound of a healthy fire, a soft crackle, a steady breath. When it changes, you respond without thinking. This awareness becomes part of your body, like balance or depth perceptio. N. Outside, winter tightens. Inside, fire mediates between earth and air. It is the fragile center of everything. Treated with respect, it sustains life. Treated carelessly, it threatens it. As you settle back now, watching embers pulse gently, you feel gratitude mixed with caution. The fire does not dominate the space. It serves it underground. That difference matters. The earth absorbs excess. The air demands restraint. And you learn slowly and attentively how to keep them in harmony through the long winter night. You start to look up more often now, not at the sky but at the ceiling, just inches above your head. When the roof is made of earth, attention naturally drifts upward. Every sound, every shift, every drip feels personal. The ground that protects you can also remind you of its weight. The ceiling is layered carefully, packed soil, sod, sometimes branches or rough planks if they were available. Each layer has a job. Together they hold warmth and block wind, but they also hold moisture, snow, and the slow pressure of winter itself. You learn quickly that gravity never sleeps. During heavy storms, you listen for subtle changes, a soft crumble, a faint crack. The difference between settling and failure matters. People learn to recognize these sounds the way sailors read waves. It was not written down. It was absorbed through nights of listening. Leaks are common. Meltwater finds path through even the most careful construction. A single drip becomes a bowl placed just right. Then a channel cut to guide water away. Then fresh packing once the weather allows. Maintenance is constant even when movement outside is impossible. There are accounts of roofs collapsing without warning, but more often there were signs first. Sagging, damp patches, an unfamiliar smell. Those who paid attention often avoided disaster. Those who did not sometimes woke to earth, spilling into their living space, heavy and unstoppable. You feel the ceiling, now pressing but steady. The weight above you is immense yet spread evenly. Snow piles up, but the earth distributes the load. This is why curved roofs and low profiles mattered so much. Height was dangerous. Modesty was structural. Some families reinforced ceilings mid-winter, propping them with posts or adding extra layers from inside. This was risky work, but sometimes necessary. The cold outside was less dangerous than the collapse above. Decisions like this were made quickly without ceremony. There is disagreement among builders studying these structures today about how often collapse actually occurred. Dramatic stories survive. Quiet successes rarely do. Most shelters held. That fact is easy to miss because survival leaves fewer records than failure. Children learn early not to jump or strike the ceiling. Movements become measured. Even laughter softens instinctively. The roof teaches restraint. As you lie back now, listening to the faint settling sounds, you feel both vulnerable and secure. The earth is close, H-E-V, present. It asks for attention but offers protection in return. Above you, snow continues to fall. Beneath it, the roof holds. The ground presses down, steady and patient, and you rest inside that balance, aware of every inch of space between yourself and the frozen world beyond. You realize, one evening, that this place beneath the ground is not just where you live, it is where life itself begins. Winter does not pause for birth. It does not soften. And yet children are born here in rooms, lit by fire and oil with earth pressing close on all sides. The space grows, suddenly intimate. Every sound matters, every movement is careful. Water is warmed slowly. Cloth is laid out within reach. The air smells of smoke and damp, soil mixed with something sharper, human and urgent. There is no spare room to retreat into, no distance between fear and necessity. Birth underground is quiet by force. Voices are lowered. Instructions are whispered. Children are sent to corners or outside if weather allows. If it does not, they stay and learn without understanding. Life arrives where survival already dominates every thought. You sense how practiced everyone becomes. These events are not rare enough to be unfamiliar. People know where to stand, what to hold, when to stay back. Knowledge is carried in hands and glances rather than words. Winter does not permit confusion for long. Afterward, the space changes. A new warmth appears, fragile and demanding. The fire is kept steadier. The air is atched more carefully. Someone sleeps lightly, listening for small sounds. A baby born underground learns warmth, darkness, and closeness before anything else. Some families later remembered these births with awe rather than fear. Others remembered only exhaustion. What remains consistent is how ordinary they became. Life did not wait for spring. It arrived when it arrived, and the underground shelter absorbed it like everything else. You watch how the earth seems to muffle even this moment. Cries do not travel far. Outside, snow continues to fall indifferent. Inside, something entirely new has entered the world. The child grows knowing low ceilings and steady heat. Their earliest memories are shaped by fire, light, and quiet. When spring comes, the first glimpse of open sky feels overwhelming. Some children cry, some laugh. All of them carry the underground with them, even when they no longer live there. As you rest now, the shelter feels fuller than before, not crowded, but occupied in a deeper sense. The earth has held another beginning. Tucked safely away from winter's reach, you close your eyes, listening to the slow rhythm of breath nearby, aware that survival here is not only about enduring the cold. It is about continuing quietly and stubbornly, even when the world above is frozen solid. As winter stretches on, something unexpected begins to happen. The underground shelters, once scattered and separate, start to feel connected. Not physically at first, but socially. You realize you're no longer surviving alone. You're part of a quiet network forming beneath the frozen surface. It starts with necessity. Someone runs low on fuel. Another family has more than they can safely store. A child falls ill and needs help through the night. Travel above ground is dangerous, sometimes impossible, so people move carefully below, ducking through entrances, knocking softly, calling out names before pushing through narrow doors. In some places, shallow tunnels appear. Not grand passages, just short connections dug between shelters that sit close together. These are not planned communities. They emerge slowly, shaped by proximity and trust. A neighbor helps reinforce a wall. Another shares a technique for managing smoke. Over time, the distance between households shrinks. You feel the shift in atmosphere. The underground space no longer feels like a private refuge only. It becomes part of something larger. Sounds travel farther now. Voices echo faintly from nearby rooms. The presence of others brings reassurance, especially during long storms when isolation weighs heaviest. These connections change behavior. People move more carefully, aware that noise carries. Fires are timed to avoid choking shared air paths. Children wander between spaces under watchful eyes, learning where they are welcome and where they must ask first. Boundaries exist, but they are flexible. There is comfort in shared hardship. When snow seals the land completely, knowing someone else is awake nearby eases fear. You hear footsteps, a cough, the scrape of a pot. These ordinary sounds become proof that life continues beyond your own walls. Food is shared. More often now. A pot of stew passed from one shelter to another, bread baked in one place, eaten in another. These exchanges are not formal. They happen quietly without record, but they sustain more than bodies. They build trust. Disagreements still occur. Space is tight. Resources are limited. But conflict underground looks different. There's nowhere to storm off to. Voices lower instead of rising. Solutions are practical rather than dramatic. Winter discourages excess emotion. You notice how leadership shifts in these conditions. Authority does not always follow age or gender. It follows competence. The person who knows how to clear a blocked vent. The one who can calm an animal. The one who stays steady when the fire misbehaves. Respect gathers around usefulness. Children grow up seeing cooperation as normal. They watch adults share tools without ceremony. They learn that survival is collective. Later, many would remember these winters as the first time they understood community, not as an idea, but as something physical and necessary. There are nights when everyone gathers in one space, a storm too fierce, a roof in danger, a sickness that requires warmth and watchfulness. Body press close, heat accumulates, stories fill the dark. These moments feel almost timeless, echoing far older, human patterns of clustering against cold. Not all settlements experience this closeness. Some remained isolated by distance or mistrust. But where shelters clustered, something like an underground village emerged invisible. From above, alive below. You lie back now, listening to the layered sounds of life beyond your walls. The earth no longer feels empty. It feels inhabited, shared. Above, winter erases roads and fences below. People find one another. The underground world becomes not just a place to hide from the cold, but a place where connection grows quietly, sustained by necessity and patience, holding everyone together until the surface thaws again. You begin to hear prayers differently underground, not because the words change, but because the space changes what they feel like. Above ground, faith often rises with open sky and tall ceilings. Here it settles low, close to the body, spoken softly so it does not bounce harshly off the earth walls. A small corner becomes sacred without anyone announcing it. A cloth hung neatly, a candle reserved for certain nights, a worn book kept wrapped in fabric so damp air does not ruin it. These objects carry weight far beyond their size. They create a sense of order in a season that constantly threatens disorder. Services become improvisations. There is no bell, no pews, no stained glass. People sit on crates, sacks, packed earth. Someone reads aloud by firelight. Someone hums a familiar melody. The tune is quieter than it would be in a church, but it reaches deeper, filling the shelter with something steady. You notice how faith becomes practical. Blessings are said over food, not as ritual decoration, but as acknowledgement that every meal is uncertain. Prayers for warmth sound less like poetry and more like honest requests. Children learn these words early, sometimes before they fully understand their meaning. Religious calendars continue even when the world above is buried. Holidays are marked with whatever is available. A special loaf made from the last of a better flour. A small gift carved from scrap wood. A story told again, not because it is new, but because repetition itself becomes comfort. Some families blend traditions, old customs carried from distant homelands mix with what the land demands here. A winter feast becomes smaller, but the intention remains. A protective charm might hang near the entrance beside a symbol of formal faith. People rarely explain these combinations. They simply did what helped them feel anchored. The underground setting also changes how people speak about fear and hope. Confession becomes easier when everyone is already close, when privacy is limited, but trust is necessary. A whispered conversation after others sleep can feel like a lifeline. In some shelters, these quiet talks mattered as much as food or heat. Not everyone finds comfort. Some lose faith during harsh winters. Others cling harder. The same storms that drive one person to prayer can drive another to bitterness. You see and feel these differences in the room, even when no one says them aloud. Children watch closely. They notice who prays, who does not, who sings, who stays silent. They learn that belief is not always loud. Sometimes it is simply the act of continuing. On certain nights, the underground space feels almost like a chapel. Firelight flickers on earth walls, shadows move like slow curtains, voices join together softly. Outside, the wind may be tearing at the surface world, but down here the sound is muted, distant, as if faith itself is insulating the room. You sit among them, feeling the warmth of bodies and the steady pulse of the fire. The words spoken are familiar, but they land differently now. They feel less like reaching up and more like holding on. When the gathering ends, no one makes a grand exit. People simply drift back to their places, wrapping themselves in blankets, settling into sleep. The sacred corner remains candle-extinguished cloth hanging still. And as you lie back, listening to the quiet, after voices fade, you understand that underground faith is not about spectacle. It is about steadiness, about creating a small island of meaning inside a season that tries to reduce life to cold and hunger. Above, winter continues without mercy. Below, someone has spoken hope into the darkness, and for a while it feels like enough. By now, the underground shelter feels familiar enough that you notice when something is off. It is not dramatic at first, just a heaviness in the air. Damp chill that lingers longer than it should, a cough that does not quite fade. Living below the surface protects you from winter, but it introduces a quieter set of risks that unfold slowly. Moisture is the constant companion you never fully get rid of. Breath condenses on cool walls, steam from cooking settles into soil. Wet boots leave dark patches that take days to dry. You learn to read these signs carefully. Too much damp and the space begins to feel wrong, heavy in a way that presses on your chest. Illness moves differently underground. When one person falls sick, everyone notices immediately. There is nowhere for symptoms to hide. A fever changes the mood of the room. A persistent cough draws quiet concern. Care becomes communal by default. Someone warms water. Someone adjusts the fire. Someone stays awake through the night listening. You become careful about air. Vents are opened even when it costs heat. Doors are cracked despite drifting snow. The balance between warmth and freshness is delicate, and mistakes announce themselves slowly. Headaches creep in, eyes sting, fatigue deepens. These are warnings you learn to respect. Some winters pass with a little trouble. Others leave marks. Letters written years later mention lingering chest problems, joints that never fully recover, a sense that certain seasons took something permanent. At the same time, many people survived multiple winters underground with no lasting harm at all. Outcomes varied, shaped by construction, weather, and sheer chance. You notice how people talk about sickness differently here. There is less drama, less mystery. Illness is treated as another winter challenge, like fuel shortages or leaking roofs. Practical responses matter more than explanations. Warmth, rest, careful observation. Hope is quiet and persistent. Children seem to bounce back more easily. They sleep deeply wrapped in layers, their breathing steady. Adults worry about what the damp air might do to growing lungs, but there is little to be done beyond vigilance. Later recollections suggest mixed experiences, some carrying winter coughs into adulthood, others remembering nothing but warmth and closeness. Cleanliness becomes a careful practice rather than an abstract ideal. Water is limited, soap is precious, floors are swept to reduce dust, bedding is aired whenever weather allows. These routines are not about comfort, they're about keeping the space livable through months of confinement. There is disagreement in later medical writing about how dangerous underground living truly was. Some point to respiratory illness rates. Others emphasize survival in conditions that would otherwise have been fatal. The records do not offer a simple answer. They reflect lives lived in extremes where every choice carried trade-offs. You sense this complexity as you sit quietly listening to the rhythm of the space. The fire breathes, the walls hold moisture and warmth in equal measure. Life persists in a narrow band between too much and too little. When someone recovers, relief spreads through the shelter. When someone does not grieve, has nowhere to go but inward. Loss underground feels heavy, contained without the release of open air or ritual space. People adapt as they must, marking absence, quietly continuing because winter leaves no alternative. As time passes, you grow attuned to your own body. You notice changes early, a tightness in the chest, a lingering chill. You respond before symptoms deepen. This attentiveness becomes part of survival, as important as tending the fire or storing food. Outside, the cold remains absolute. Inside, health becomes a balancing act played out in breath and warmth. The underground shelter offers protection, but it demands awareness in return. You lie back now, breathing, slowly feeling the air move gently through the space. It is not perfect. It is not safe in every way, but it is workable. And in a winter that punishes mistakes without mercy, workable is enough. The earth holds you close, not as a cure, but as a compromise. And for now, that compromise keeps life going one careful breath at a time. You wake to a different kind of sound. Not wind, not the familiar settling of earth, but water. A faint, irregular drip that echoes more than it should. Spring is approaching, and with it comes a new set of dangers that feel almost unfair after surviving the worst of winter. The snow above you begins to melt slowly at first, then faster. What once pressed down as saint, able weight now turns fluid, searching for paths through soil and sod. Underground shelters that performed beautifully in deep colds suddenly feel vulnerable. You learn quickly that winter does not end cleanly. It loosens its grip in unpredictable ways. You place bowls beneath leaks, adjust channels cut months earlier, and hope the roof holds. The earth swells as it absorbs moisture. Walls soften, floors darken. In some shelters, water creeps in, silently soaking bedding before anyone notices. In others, streams form overnight, reshaping the space you worked so hard to stabilize. People emerge cautiously during these thaws. The surface is treacherous, snow hides, mud, ice breaks without warning, yet the need to inspect damage pulls you upward. When you step outside, the world looks unfamiliar. White stretches broken by brown scars, roof lines sagging, entrances half collapsed under wet weight. Some underground homes fail completely during this season. Roofs cave in under the combined pressure of melt and gravity. Walls slump inward. Families scramble to salvage what they can, carrying belongings into the open. Cold air, they thought they had escaped for good. These moments rarely make it into heroic stories. They're chaotic, muddy, and exhausting. Others fare better. Careful drainage, reinforced ceilings, and sheer luck keep shelters intact. These households become temporary refugees, taking in neighbors until conditions improve. The underground community shifts again, responding to new pressures. You notice how quickly priorities change. Warmth is no longer the main concern. Dryness is, air movement is. Preventing mold, rot, and collapse becomes the focus. Fires are kept smaller, vents are widened, doors are propped open when weather allows, even if it means letting in cold. There is frustration in this phase. After months of endurance, the shelter that saved you now demands more work. Some people speak openly about abandoning underground life as soon as possible. Others see this as simply another season to manage. Children delight in the first signs of thaw. Dripping icicles become toys. Mud is irresistible. Adults watch nervously, aware that the ground is unstable, that familiar paths can vanish underfoot. Spring is not gentle here. It is messy and impatient. You sense a shift in mood. Relief mixes with weariness. Survival fatigue sets in. People are alive but tired in a way that goes deeper than muscle. The underground space feels temporary again, its magic fading as daylight stretches longer. When you lie back at night, the drip continues. The sound is not threatening yet, but it keeps you half awake. You think about the work ahead, repairs, decisions, whether to rebuild below or risk going above. Winter did not defeat you, but it did not leave you unchanged either. As snow turns to water and water reshapes the ground, you understand that Survival is not a single victory. It is a series of adjustments, each one demanding attention. For now, the shelter still stands. The earth still holds. But you're already imagining the sky again, knowing that the season that forced you underground is loosening its grip. Even as it tests you one final time, you notice that not everyone rushes to leave the ground once spring finally steadies itself. Some shelters collapse or flood, forcing families out whether they want to go or not. Others remain stubbornly intact, dry enough, warm enough, familiar enough that leaving feels unnecessary, even risky. For those who stayed underground through multiple winters, the shelter stopped feeling like an emergency solution. It became home in a deeper sense. Walls were smoothed again, new shelves were carved into earth, entrances were improved rather than abandoned. What began as a seasonal retreat quietly turned permanent. You can feel the logic behind this choice. Above-ground construction takes time, materials and energy that are still scarce. Timber must be hauled from far away. Nails are precious, windows cost money. Underground, much of the work is already done. The earth continues to insulate. The roof still holds when maintained. Some families added small above-ground structures, later using them only in fair weather while keeping the dugout as a winter anchor. Others expanded downward instead, carving extra space as needs grew. Children raised underground adapted easily. For them, the low ceiling was not a hardship, but a constant. There is also a sense of safety that lingers. Storms feel less threatening when you know how to disappear beneath them. Even as seasons change, the memory of winter remains vivid. People who had nearly frozen once did not forget it quickly. Visitors sometimes reacted with surprise or discomfort. To those used to open rooms and sunlight underground, living felt unsettling. To those who had endured brutal winters, it felt sensible. Reactions depended entirely on experience. You hear quiet judgments pass between settlers. Some see staying underground as a sign of failure. Others see it as wisdom. These opinions rarely change minds. Choice hardens quickly after survival is on the line. There is an unspoken practicality to it all. If a shelter works, you keep using it. Comfort becomes relative. Familiarity outweighs convention. Over time, underground living loses its strangeness and becomes simply one more way of inhabiting the land. You sit inside now, fire, low daylight, filtering faintly through the entrance. The world above is open again, but you feel no urgency to rush back into it. The earth has carried you through the worst. Trust once earned is not easily discarded. Some shelters would remain occupied for decades. Others would be filled in, slowly absorbed back into the ground. The difference often came down to personal history rather than opportunity. As you rest, you realize that survival has quietly reshaped preference. What once felt like hiding now feels like choosing stability. The ground does not judge. It simply holds. You close your eyes, aware that staying underground is not about fear of the surface. It is about remembering what winter demanded and choosing not to forget. You start to notice how different this underground life looks depending on where you are. The idea is the same, but the details change quietly with the land itself. Soil behaves differently from place to place. Weather lingers in its own ways. What worked perfectly for one family feels awkward or risky for another just a few miles away. In flatter regions, shelters spread outward rather than downward. The ground there is dense and stubborn, better suited to shallow. Dugouts reinforced with thick sod walls. Roofs are low and broad, built to resist wind more than weight. You feel how these spaces stretch sideways, giving a sense of width even when height is limited. In hillier country, people carve directly into slopes. These shelters feel more cave-like, with long entrances that bend slightly before opening into living space. The curve keeps cold air from rushing in and gives water a path to escape during thaws. You sense how gravity works with you instead of against you here. Farther north, frost changes everything. Digging too deep becomes dangerous when ground heaves and shifts. Shelters stay closer to the surface, insulated heavily above rather than below. In these places, snow itself becomes part of the structure, piled deliberately to thicken walls and block wind. Winter architecture adapts without ever being formally planned. You imagine settlers arriving with the same basic idea and then being forced to rethink it almost immediately. A wall that holds in one region slumps in another. A roof that sheds snow easily elsewhere collapses under wet weight here. Knowledge becomes local very quickly. Material shaped design as much as climate. Clay-rich soil packs smoothly and seals gaps. Sandy ground demands reinforcement. In some places, stone is available and becomes part of walls or floors. In others, everything depends on grass roots and careful layering. You learn to trust what is under your hands rather than what worked somewhere else. These differences create subtle cultural shifts. One region favors wider communal shelters. Another prefers tightly sealed family spaces. Children raised in one place find other underground homes, strange even though they share the same purpose. Familiarity is regional, not universal. You feel how sound behaves differently too. In dense soil, noise dies quickly. In looser ground, echoes linger. Even voices adjust without anyone noticing. Speech softens or sharpens depending on how the earth responds. As you rest, you picture these shelters scattered across landscapes, each shaped by its own constraints. There is no single model, no standard plan, only adaptation repeated over and over until it feels natural. This variety rarely shows from above. From the surface, winter makes everything look the same. Snow flattens differences. Underground, however, each place tells distinct story through texture, smell, and shape. You settle deeper into your own space, aware that it is part of a wider pattern without ever being identical to it. The ground beneath you has taught its own lessons, and you have learned them by living here. Outside, the land waits for warmer seasons. Inside, the shelter holds steady shaped not by theory, but by soil weather, and the quiet decisions made night after night to stay alive. You begin to hear stories about underground living from people who never experienced it themselves. These stories travel faster than winter storms and grow larger as they move. By the time they reach distant towns or cities, they sound nothing like the quiet reality beneath the ground. Some imagine underground settlers as desperate, half-wild, hiding like animals from the world. Others picture something almost mythical, whole families living in darkness, afraid of the sun. The truth sits somewhere in between. But truth travels poorly when it competes with imagination. You notice how visitors react when they finally see an underground shelter. Some laugh nervously. Some stare too long. A few make jokes they think are kind but land awkwardly. The earth walls and low ceilings challenge their sense of what a home should look like. Rumors spread easily. People claim underground families never leave their shelters, that children forget how to walk upright, that sickness is constant. None of this matches your experience, yet you understand how such ideas form. What is hidden invites speculation. There is also a kind of moral judgment woven into these stories. Living underground is framed as backward, temporary, or shameful. Few outsiders consider that it might be deliberate, effective, even sensible. The surface world often equates visibility with success. You feel the weight of this judgment when you emerge after a long winter. The sun feels good, but so does the shelter you leave behind. Explaining that balance to someone who has never needed it feels impossible. Children raised underground sometimes struggle when they first encounter these reactions. Their home is treated like a curiosity, something to outgrow. They learn quickly which details to share and which to keep quiet. At the same time, underground living acquires a strange fascination. Some people want to see it up close. They ask endless questions. How do you breathe? How do you sleep? How do you live like that? Their curiosity carries both admiration and disbelief. You notice how these myths say more about the teller than the subject. Fear of confinement, fear of darkness, fear of dependence on the earth. For those who have lived through winter underground, these fears feel abstract. The shelter itself remains unchanged by gossip. It does not defend itself. It simply works or fails based on how it is built and cared for. Reputation means nothing to soil and snow. As you rest now, you think about how stories shape memory. Years from now, people may remember underground living as something harsher or stranger than it was. They may forget the warmth, the cooperation, the quiet moments. You listen to the steady sounds around you and feel grounded in what you know. Reality here is not dramatic. It is careful, contained, and resilient. Above, stories will continue to grow. Below, life continues in the same measured way it always has, indifferent to rumor, focused only on making it through another season. You start to notice a shift in tone once officials and distant authorities begin paying attention to how people are living through winter. Underground shelters, once private, decisions made out of necessity, slowly become topics of discussion in offices, far from the cold. Inspectors arrive when roads allow. They peer into low entrances, ask questions, make notes. Some nod with quiet approval at the ingenuity. Others frown at the damp walls and limited light. Their reactions depend less on what they see and more on what they believe a proper home should be. Pamphlets circulate offering advice. Some encourage building above ground as soon as possible, framing underground living as a temporary hardship to be escaped. Others acknowledge its effectiveness and offer tips on ventilation and drainage. The guidance is inconsistent, shaped by competing priorities rather than lived experience. You feel this tension when decisions are made about land and loans. Above ground, structures are often rewarded with recognition and support. Underground shelters are tolerated but rarely celebrated. They exist in a gray space between innovation and embarrassment. Despite this, some local officials quietly accept what works. When winters are severe, enforcement softens, rules bend. Survival has a way of changing priorities. A shelter that keeps people alive becomes hard to argue against, even if it does not fit neat definitions. You hear stories of settlements praised for resilience while privately criticized for appearance. Pride and practicality pull in opposite directions. Some families rush to build visible houses to avoid scrutiny. Others continue living as they always have, uninterested in approval from afar. Children absorb these mixed messages. They hear their homes described differently depending on who is speaking. Official language feels distant from daily reality. They learn early that authority does not always align with experience. As you sit underground now, the shelter feels unchanged by these debates. The earth does not care about policy. It responds only to weight, warmth, and time. You think about how survival choices slowly become political without ever intending to. What began as digging a hole before. Winter turns into a statement about progress, permanence, and success. The fire burns steadily. The walls hold. Above, opinions shift with seasons and distance. Below, the shelter continues to do its quiet work, indifferent to labels, focused only on keeping you alive until spring arrives again. You feel the pull of the surface long before you fully trust it. The light lasts longer now. The air softens. Snow retreats into shadows and low places. After months below, the idea of living above ground again feels both familiar and strangely risky. The first attempts are tentative. A small structure goes up near the shelter, rough boards, a simple roof, something to store tools or sit in the sun for an hour. You do not abandon the underground space. You test the surface the way you would test ice carefully, and with memory close at hand. Living above ground requires new habits. Heat escapes faster. Wind finds edges. Nights cool unevenly. You notice how much effort goes into maintaining comfort when walls no longer share warmth with the soil. Fires burn brighter. Fuel disappears faster. Every evening feels exposed. Some families move up gradually. They sleep above on warm nights and return underground when temperatures dip. Children treat this as adventure, at first racing between worlds. Adults move more slowly, carrying caution in their posture. You begin to add windows. Even small ones feel extravagant. Light pours in sharp and direct. Shadows behave differently. Space feels larger but also emptier. Sounds carry farther. Privacy returns in unexpected ways. The underground shelter does not disappear. It becomes storage, a refuge during storms, a place to retreat when weather turns suddenly. Its role changes, but its presence remains constant, a reminder of what it once meant. There is an emotional complexity to this transition. Relief mixes with unease. Comfort feels less secure without earth pressing close. Some people miss the steadiness of underground temperatures. Others welcome the variability, tired of damp air and low ceilings. You notice how quickly preferences shift. A year ago, you would have endured anything to escape the surface cold. Now you weigh choices: convenience against safety, light against insulation, freedom against protection. Children adapt easily. They stretch upward, exploring space they forgot existed. Their laughter sounds louder, sharper. Adults sometimes flinch at the noise used to the muted underground world. As you sit above ground in the evening light, you glance toward the entrance below. It looks small now, modest, yet you know what it held. You know what it gave. The transition is not a clean break. It is layering. Above and below exist together for a long time. Winter does not leave all at once, and neither does the shelter that kept you alive. You breathe in the open air, aware that the ground beneath you is still there waiting, not as a last resort anymore, but as a trusted option. And that knowledge changes how you face the seasons ahead. You start to notice how quickly the land forgets. Once a family moves above ground for good, the signs of underground life fade with surprising speed. Grass creeps back. Soil settles, entrances collapse inward or are filled deliberately to keep animals out. Within a few seasons, the surface smooths itself as if nothing was ever there. Only small clues remain if you know how to look. A shallow depression where snow melts first, a patch of grass that grows thicker than the rest, stones arranged too neatly to be natural. These marks catch your eye now because you've lived beneath them. To others, they mean nothing. When you walk across old homesteads, you feel an odd sense of recognition. Your feet pass over rooms that once held warmth and breath, places where fires burn steadily while storms erase the world above. The earth has closed over them, but it has not erased their memory completely. Children who grew up underground sometimes return years later and struggle to locate their first home. They remember the shape of rooms more clearly than their position on the land. Memory becomes internal when the landscape offers no help. You realize how fragile physical evidence really is. Wooden houses rot, fences fall, underground shelters vanish almost entirely. What remains lives mostly in stories passed quietly within families, or lost when no one thinks to tell them. Some people deliberately erase these traces. Underground living carried stigma for many years. Filling in a shelter could feel like moving on, like proof of progress. Others leave them untouched, respecting what they provided when nothing else worked. As seasons repeat, the land reclaims these spaces fully. Roots push through old ceilings, burrows cross former walls. Water settles where people once slept. The earth does not preserve out of sentiment. It absorbs. You pause now, standing over ground that once sheltered life. The surface feels solid, ordinary, yet you know what lies beneath, or once did. This awareness changes how you walk, how you look. The underground world does not ask to be remembered. It does not announce itself. It simply existed when needed and then faded back into soil. And in that quiet disappearance, it mirrors the people who built it, endured within it, and eventually moved on. You take a slow breath and continue walking, carrying that knowledge with you beneath the calm surface. Whole winters once passed unseen, and that feels important. Even if the land itself no longer shows it, you would never notice them at first glance. That is a strange thing. Archaeologists do not stumble over underground homes the way they find foundations or walls. They have to slow down almost to the pace of someone listening rather than looking. The clues are subtle, a soil color that changes where it should not, a pattern of stones that interrupts natural layering, a shallow dip that repeats across a field. When excavations happened, they are careful and quiet. Layers are peeled back gently. What emerges rarely looks dramatic. No grand chambers, no sweeping corridors, just compact spaces shaped by hands that work quickly and with purpose. Fire pits stained dark with soot, packed, floors worn smooth by years of movement, post holes where supports once stood. What strike researchers most is how deliberate everything feels. Nothing wasted, no excess space, every inch accounted for. These shelters were not experiments, they were solutions refined through experience. Even when tools were simple, the results showed planning and understanding of material behavior. Personal objects sometimes surface, a broken cup, a button, a child's toy smoothed by handling. These items feel intimate in a way stone, walls do not. They remind you that these were not just shelters, but homes where people passed long winters thinking ordinary thoughts. Dating these sites can be challenging. Organic materials decay, wood disappears. What remains must be interpreted carefully. Soil tells part of the story, but not all of it. Context matters, and context is often fragile. You sense the restraint required in this work. It is tempting to draw big conclusions, to turn small spaces into sweeping narratives. Careful researchers resist that. They let patterns emerge, slowly comparing sites across regions, noting similarities and differences without forcing them into a single story. What becomes clear over time is scale. Underground living was not rare or isolated. It appears again and again wherever climate demanded it and materials allowed. This realization reshapes how settlement history is understood. Survival did not always look like cabins and fences. Sometimes it looked like absence. You imagine future generations walking over these same fields, unaware of what lies beneath. The land appears empty, yet it once held warmth, voices, and endurance. The underground world leaves a light footprint, easy to miss, easy to forget. As you rest now, you feel connected to that quiet persistence. Lives lived carefully. Space is made to last just long enough, then surrendered back to the ground. Discovery comes later in pieces, through patience rather than spectacle. The earth keeps its secrets well. It offers them only to those willing to look slowly, to listen to what soil and shadow suggest. And when those secrets surface, they do not shout. They whisper just enough to remind you how many winters were survived without ever being seen. You start to see the underground shelters not as relics, but as messages, left quietly for anyone willing to notice. They speak about climate in a language that does not use words. Thick walls, low ceilings, careful airflow, all of it shaped by cold that could not be ignored. Modern winters feel different to you now, shorter, less absolute. Yet when storms do arrive, when power lines fail and roads close, the memory of Earth held close returns. You recognize how quickly comfort disappears when systems break. The underground way of living does not rely on networks stretching across distance. It relies on physics and patience. There is something humbling in that realization. The ground moderates extremes without asking for fuel or maintenance beyond attention. Heat stored slowly, cold resisted quietly. These shelters worked because, say they, accepted limits rather than trying to overpower them. You notice how some modern buildings echo these ideas. Basements, earth-sheltered homes, thick insulation, passive heating. These concepts feel new only because the language has changed. The principles are old, carried forward under different names. As climates shift again, interest in these approaches rises and falls. People look for ways to stay warm that do not depend entirely on fragile systems. The underground shelters offer one answer, though not a simple one. They demand trade-offs, light for stability, space for efficiency. You Think about how easily knowledge can be lost when conditions change. When winters soften, the urgency fades, skills atrophy. Solutions that once felt obvious begin to seem extreme. It takes a crisis to make them feel sensible again. Walking through a modern city, you can still spot echoes of this thinking. Buildings tucked into hillsides, green roofs thick with soil, spaces designed to buffer temperature rather than fight it. These choices feel deliberate in a way that connects past and present. The underground shelters were never meant to be admired. They were meant to work. That focus gives them a strange relevance. Now, in a world relearning how to live within limits, you rest with this thought, feeling the slow breath of the earth beneath you. The ground has always been there, steady and patient. It offers the same lesson again and again. Survival does not always mean standing taller. Sometimes it means settling in, lowering yourself, and letting the land do what it has always done best. The message is quiet but persistent. When winter is brutal, the earth is not your enemy. It is your insulation, your shelter, your ally, waiting just beneath your feet. You notice it in small moments, long after the worst winters have passed. You step into a basement on a hot day and feel that immediate cool hush, like the air is resting. You walk through a stone cellar and your shoulders drop, without you meaning to. Even in modern buildings, with bright lights and smooth walls, the below-ground spaces carry a particular mood. They feel steady, they feel contained, they feel like the world has stopped shouting. It is strange, really, how quickly your body trusts the ground. You remember the first winter when you dug down and felt the wind lose its voice. That sensation stays with you, the sense that the earth is not just material but behavior. It moderates, it muffles, it holds. When you live above ground, you're always negotiating with the atmosphere, with gusts and shifts and the constant exchange of heat. Below ground, the negotiation changes, it slows, it becomes less dramatic. In many places where winters are harsh, people have always built partly into the earth, whether they called it a dugout, an earth lodge, a turf house, or simply a winter home. In Iceland, for example, turf structures with thick walls were used for centuries because they conserved heat and made use of local materials. You do not need to know the full architecture to understand the instinct behind it. When the environment punishes exposed surfaces, you reduce exposure, you tuck yourself in. But the pull is not only practical, it is emotional, almost physical. A low ceiling can feel oppressive, yes, but it can also feel like a hand resting gently on your shoulder. The difference depends on the day, on your temperament, on how tired you are. After long hours of wind and glare, the underground feels like shade for the mind. You find yourself thinking about sound again. Above ground, noise travels. It escapes, it bounces. Down below, noise sinks into the walls. You speak softly because the room asks you to. You move more slowly because fast movement feels wrong in tight space. Even your thoughts seem to drop in volume. You stop scanning the horizon. You stop listening for distant threats. You listen to what is near. Fire, breath, the shift of fabric, the creak of a support post. It is intimate, in a way that can be soothing. And then there is the sense of hiding, though you might not call it that out loud. There is comfort in being unseen. Winter made that obvious, but the feeling persists, beyond winter too. Underground spaces remove you from display. They do not invite comparison. They do not require performance. You can exist without being watched. Some settlers, after they finally built above-ground houses, kept returning to their dugouts in storms, even when they did not have to. They stored food there, sure, but they also used them as a place to wait out weather, to retreat when the wind made the surface world feel sharp and hostile. That habit tells you something about what the underground meant. Not only a last resort, but a kind of reassurance. You discover the same pull in more unusual places. In mining towns, people sometimes described a strange calm when descending into shafts despite the danger because the air was still and the world above felt distant. In wartime, civilians have taken shelter in cellars, and tunnels and later spoke about the paradox of feeling safer while being buried. Not because underground is inherently safe. It is not, but because the mind responds to enclosure with a particular kind of focus. The outside world becomes a rumor. There is a curious detail that floats through stories of underground living, the kind of thing people repeat because it is both funny and slightly unsettling. Some families claimed they could tell the weather by sound alone, listening to how wind and snow pressed against the earth above. Others said they could feel temperature shifts through the walls, like the ground was breathing warmer or colder. Whether those sensations were truly accurate or simply the brain trying to create control in an uncontrollable season, you cannot fully know, but you can understand why people said it. When you are buried, you become sensitive to the smallest changes. You also notice how often underground spaces places of memory. The cellar, where a family hid during storms. The dugout where a baby was born. The earth room where a sick neighbor recovered. These spaces hold stories because they held bodies in vulnerable moments. Even when the entrance collapses and grass grows over it, people point to the spot and speak softly as if the ground can still hear. At the same time, not everyone feels the call. Some people experience underground as suffocating, even when air is fresh. They want windows, distance, the reassurance of a visible exit. Their bodies do not relax below ground. They tense. They count steps to the door. They cannot sleep. There are descriptions of settlers who refused to stay in dugouts even when it meant colder nights, choosing exposure over confinement. That difference in response is one of the most interesting parts of the story, because it suggests the underground is not only a technology, it is a relationship. And relationships depend on the person. You think about why that is. Maybe some minds associate enclosure with safety, maybe others associate it with danger. Maybe it depends on childhood, on experience, on the first time you were trapped somewhere or sheltered somewhere. The record does not explain it neatly. The same earth can feel like a blanket or a lid. Still, the pattern remains. When conditions become extreme, people return to the ground. In heat waves, basement become refuge. In storms, cellars become sanctuaries. In places with scarce building materials, earth becomes the building. Even in modern design, you see a quiet revival of earth-sheltered homes and insulated green roofs. Not always for romance, but for efficiency and resilience. The principles are old, the language is new. You sit with this thought in the darkened quiet of your imagined shelter, and you notice how your body responds. Your breathing slows. The air feels steady. The sounds are small and manageable. There is no horizon to worry about, no endless white field daring you to cross it. Just walls, warmth, and the slow patience of soil. The earth still calls because it offers a kind of certainty that weather does not. It does not promise comfort, but it promises moderation. It does not promise beauty, but it promises function. And in a world where winter once made grand plans look silly, function becomes its own form of peace. You let that peace settle over you now like snow settling on the roof far above, quiet and even. The ground holds not as a miracle but as a steady fact of the world. And as you drift towards sleep, you understand why across centuries and cultures and climates, humans keep returning to this simple choice. When the air turns brutal, you go down. When the world becomes too loud, you go down. When you want to feel held rather than tested, you go down. And for a while, in that enclosed steadiness, you remember what it feels like to survive without fighting every gust of the sky. You find yourself slowing without meaning to, not just your body, but your thoughts. By now, the underground world feels less like a response to danger and more like a lesson that unfolded gradually, one winter at a time. People did not go underground because they wanted to disappear. They went because the surface demanded too much heat lost, too much fuel burned, too much risk carried in every step outside. The ground offered a different bargain. Lower your profile, accept darkness trade, pride for steadiness. You think back to all the ways the earth held life together. It softened cold, it stored food, it hid communities from storms and from judgment, it absorbed sound weight and fear. It did not solve every problem, but it narrowed them to a size people could manage. There is something deeply human in that choice, not conquering the environment, not escaping it, simply stepping into it, trusting that being surrounded might be safer than being exposed. You picture the final winter nights in those shelters. Fires low, breathing slow, snow pressing gently above. No drama, no speeches, just endurance carried quietly from one hour to the next. When spring finally returned for good, many people left the ground behind. Others kept it close. Either way, the lesson remained. Survival does not always reward boldness. Sometimes it rewards listening. And now, as the story begins to fade, the underground world feels very far away and very close at the same time. A place of earth and darkness, yes, but also a place of warmth, patience, and quiet persistence. The noise of history softens here. Dates and names blur. What remains is sensation, packed soil beneath your hands, fire, light moving across low walls, the deep calm of being protected from something that once felt unstoppable. You let that calm linger. The pacing slows now, sentences stretch, the urgency drains away. You imagine yourself lying back in the dim light wrapped in layers, the earth above you thick and steady. The wind may still be howling somewhere far above, but it no longer matters. Down here, the world has narrowed to breath and warmth and rest. There is no need to prepare, no need to watch, no need to think ahead. The ground holds, your body sinks into stillness, muscles loosen, thoughts drift without effort. The story does not end sharply, it simply settles, the way snow settles after a storm, smoothing everything into quiet. You are safe here, the earth is patient, and as sleep takes you, the last thing you feel is not cold or fear, but the steady reassurance of being held by something that has endured far longer than winter ever could. Sweet dreams.